Daniel Cross watched a woman sit alone on a platform, dressed in wedding clothes, waiting for someone who would never come. He had two choices: walk away like everyone else, or do something that would change both their lives forever. He chose the impossible. For 15 years, Daniel had hauled cargo through the outer sectors, and in that time, he'd learned one fundamental rule: mind your own business when it came to other species' customs. Everyone had traditions that seemed strange to outsiders, and getting involved usually created more problems than it solved. So when he docked his small freight ship at Villian Station for routine resupply, his plan was simple: be gone within a day, load his next cargo shipment, and move on. At 43, Daniel had been running independent cargo since leaving corporate shipping. He preferred the solitude of space travel to the complications of crowded stations. He'd seen enough of humanity's social complexities that spending weeks alone in transit actually felt peaceful rather than isolating. The silence of space was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. While waiting for his cargo to be loaded, Daniel wandered through the station's public areas, killing time before departure. The corridors hummed with the usual station activity: traders negotiating deals, families reuniting, maintenance crews working on environmental systems. He'd seen it all before 1,000 times on 100 different stations. Then he saw the marriage dock, and everything changed. The Velerons were known throughout the sector for their elaborate courtship and marriage traditions. Their culture placed enormous emphasis on youth and beauty, with very specific age parameters for when individuals were considered suitable for marriage. The marriage docks were ceremonial spaces where families presented their unmarried members to potential spouses, all arranged through complex social negotiations that could take years to finalize. What caught Daniel's attention wasn't the tradition itself. It was the woman sitting alone on the platform. She was dressed in traditional Veleron bridal attire, intricate fabric that shimmered with embedded light threads, colors that shifted with her slightest movement. But there was no attendants, no family hovering nearby, no prospective spouse approaching. She appeared to be perhaps 40 in human equivalent years, and Daniel knew enough about Veleron culture to understand that was considered well past their traditional marriage age. What struck him most was how everyone else behaved. Station personnel and passing Velerons carefully avoided looking at her, treating her presence with a deliberate blindness that suggested deep cultural shame. It was as if she'd become invisible while sitting in plain sight, a ghost haunting her own rejection. Daniel watched for several minutes, confusion growing into something darker. A passing station worker, human like Daniel, noticed his stare. First time seeing a final posting, the worker asked quietly, "Hey, what?" The worker glanced at the woman, then away quickly, as if even looking might invite bad luck. "That's Saras Mara." Her family left her at the marriage dock as a final formality before they formally disown her. Veleron culture dictates that unmarried individuals past a certain age are shameful failures. Saras has reached the absolute limit of acceptable marriage age without finding a spouse. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. So they just abandon her here? "It's ceremonial," the worker explained, clearly uncomfortable. "She'll sit there for the required 6 hours, during which anyone could theoretically claim her as a spouse. But everyone understands no one will. After the time ends, she'll be formally unmarried and disowned, left to make her own way as a social outcast." The casual cruelty of it hit Daniel like a physical blow. Why hasn't she found a spouse before now? The worker shrugged. Veleron marriage is highly competitive and status-focused. Word is, Saras had prospects when she was younger, but her family suffered a financial reversal that reduced her desirability. By the time their fortunes recovered, she was considered too old. She spent 15 years in a declining spiral, fewer and fewer prospects as she aged past cultural preferences. It's a trap, really. Once you start sliding, there's no climbing back up. Daniel observed Saras more carefully. She sat with remarkable dignity despite the obvious humiliation. Her posture remained straight, her expression composed. She wasn't crying or showing visible distress, though subtle color shifts rippled across her skin, a Veleron emotional indicator that suggested profound sadness beneath that controlled exterior. There was something in her bearing that spoke to quiet strength rather than defeat, even in circumstances designed to be maximally shameful. She'd been placed here to break, but she refused to shatter. Not publicly, not where they could see. Daniel found himself angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, but the cold, calculated fury that came from watching injustice unfold in slow motion. A person was being publicly discarded because she didn't fit arbitrary age parameters. Her worth was being completely dismissed based on cultural timelines that seemed designed to create artificial scarcity and hierarchy to ensure some people remained valuable while others became disposable. Almost without conscious decision, Daniel found himself walking toward the marriage dock. The station worker grabbed his arm. "Don't. Getting involved could create diplomatic complications. And besides, what would be the point? She's about to be formally disowned anyway." Daniel pulled his arm free gently. Maybe that's exactly the point. He wasn't thinking about complications anymore. He was thinking about a person sitting alone, being publicly rejected, and how no one deserved that regardless of age or cultural circumstances. He was thinking about how easy it was to walk past injustice when it wore the mask of tradition. Daniel approached the marriage dock platform. Saras noticed his approach, her expression shifting from resignation to confusion. A human approaching a Velaron marriage dock was unusual, possibly unprecedented. Around the perimeter, station security also noticed and started moving toward the dock, probably concerned about potential cultural disruption. Daniel addressed Saras directly in Standard Galactic, keeping his voice respectful but clear. "I apologize for my directness, but I understand you're at the marriage dock awaiting potential spouses. Is the dock open to any species or only to Velerons?" Saras's confusion deepened, color patterns flickering across her skin like thoughts she couldn't quite hide. But she answered with careful formality, her voice steady. "Traditionally, the marriage dock is open to any who wish to make a claim, though in practice only Velerons participate in Veleron marriage customs. If I were to claim you as spouse according to Veleron custom, would that claim be legitimate?" Saras stared at him, clearly trying to process why a human would even ask this question. Several seconds passed. Yes. Technically, any formal claim made at the marriage dock during the traditional waiting period would be binding according to Veleron law. Then Daniel did something that shocked everyone witnessing. He formally claimed Saras as his spouse, speaking the traditional Veleron words he'd learned from a hastily accessed station database. His pronunciation was probably terrible, his accent completely wrong, but the intent was absolutely clear. Saras froze in shock, her skin flashing colors Daniel couldn't interpret. Station security stopped their approach, uncertain how to handle a situation that was technically following custom but completely unprecedented. A crowd began to gather, including several Velerons whose skin tones shifted toward shades that Daniel guessed meant outrage. A Veleron elder pushed through the crowd, approaching the dock with an expression that needed no translation. He was clearly intending to challenge the claim. Daniel stood his ground, keeping his voice level but firm. "I've made a formal marriage claim according to Veleron custom during the appropriate waiting period. I expect it to be honored according to your law." The elder's skin flashed deep crimson patterns. "This custom is for Velerons. A human claiming a Veleron bride is inappropriate and possibly insulting to our entire culture." Saras herself confirmed the dock is open to any species, Daniel countered. "Veleron law, as I understand it, doesn't specify species restrictions on marriage claims. If you refuse my claim, you're essentially admitting your own customs are arbitrary and meaningless, that the rules only apply when you like who's following them." This created a diplomatic problem that rippled through the gathering crowd like a shockwave. If they rejected a legitimate claim made according to their own rules just because they didn't like who was making it, they undermined their entire marriage system. But accepting a human's claim on a Veleron bride already considered worthless by their standards was also culturally problematic, perhaps even more so. The elder's expression hardened. "Why would you make this claim? What do you hope to gain? What mockery is this?" Daniel's answer was straightforward, stripped of pretense. "I watched her sitting alone, being publicly rejected by her own people, and I found it cruel. She deserves better than being discarded because of arbitrary age restrictions. I'm not mocking your customs. I'm using your customs to prevent what I see as an injustice. If your marriage law allows me to claim her, then I'm claiming her. You can either honor your own laws or admit your customs are meaningless. Your choice." Throughout this confrontation, Saras hadn't spoken. She sat watching Daniel with an expression that suggested she was trying to understand his motivations, to find the angle, the hidden purpose. In her experience, no one did something like this without wanting something in return. The elder reluctantly conceded, his voice tight with disapproval. "The claim is technically legitimate. However, you should understand that marriage between species is complex. Veleron marriage comes with specific obligations and expectations that you may not comprehend." Daniel turned away from the elder and addressed Saras directly. Will you accept my claim? You have the right to refuse it according to Veleron custom. Saras studied him for a long moment. Her skin shifted through colors he was learning might indicate calculation, uncertainty, hope, fear. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? Daniel's answer was honest in a way that seemed to surprise even him. I want nothing except to prevent you from being abandoned like you're worthless. I'm not expecting anything from you beyond basic civility. If you accept my claim, we'll figure out what our marriage means together. No predetermined script. No obligations you don't choose. Saras held his gaze, searching for deception and apparently not finding it. Then she accepted the claim. Her voice was quiet but firm, stating the traditional words that constituted acceptance of a marriage proposal. The words felt heavy in the air, binding in ways that transcended mere ceremony. The crowd's reaction was immediate and mixed. Outrage from some Velerons, their skin flashing angry patterns. Fascination from others, colors shifting toward curiosity. Complete bafflement from the station's human population, who had no context for what they'd just witnessed. The marriage was formalized through a brief ceremony conducted by the elder, who made his disapproval abundantly clear even as he followed the required rituals. His movements were precise but cold, each gesture a criticism. He couldn't speak aloud. According to Veleron law, recognized across multiple sectors, Daniel Cross and Saras Mara were now married. Daniel's cargo ship was exactly what someone would expect from 15 years of solitary hauling. Cramped utilitarian, clearly lived in by someone who spent most of their time alone. The corridors were narrow, the living space minimal, everything designed for efficiency rather than comfort. He apologized for the conditions as he showed Saras around, his discomfort obvious. I know it's not much. Ship's limitations and all that. You can take the sleeping cabin. I'll move my stuff to the cargo bay. There's a small food prep area. The hygiene unit works most of the time, and the environmental systems keep everything breathable. Saras was quiet, still processing what had happened, her skin showing muted colors that suggested emotional overload. She followed him through the ship, taking in her new reality with careful attention. When they finished the brief tour, she asked him again, in private this time, "Why did you claim me? What do you actually want?" Daniel sat down on a cargo container, suddenly looking exhausted. He ran a hand through his hair and took a moment before answering. I've spent 15 years in space, mostly alone. I've seen a lot of different cultures and customs. Some I respect, some I find strange but harmless, and some I find needlessly cruel. Watching you being abandoned at that dock fell into the last category. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I know this creates complications. We're married now according to your culture's law, but we're strangers from different species. I don't have a clear plan for what comes next. I just knew I couldn't watch someone be discarded like that without doing something. What do you expect from our marriage? Daniel admitted the truth. I'm not entirely sure. I know Veleron marriage involves specific obligations. Spouses are expected to support each other financially and socially. But I also know our circumstances are unusual. I'm willing to provide for you as my spouse, to share my life and my ship with you. But I don't expect you to pretend feelings you don't have or fulfill obligations you're not comfortable with. We'll figure out what our marriage means as we go. Make it up as we need to. Saras was quiet for a long time, her colors shifting through patterns Daniel couldn't read. Then she told him about herself, her voice carrying years of accumulated pain. I'm 43 in Veleron years. 5 years past what my culture considers the absolute maximum acceptable marriage age. I was engaged twice when I was younger. Good matches, or so I thought. But both engagements were broken when my family's financial situation changed. As I got older and remained unmarried, I became increasingly unmarriageable. The longer I stayed single, the more impossible it became to change that status. She paused, her skin showing darker patterns. The shame of my unmarried status reflected on my family, creating pressure that eventually led to them abandoning me at the marriage dock. They couldn't bear carrying that shame anymore, so they transferred it entirely to me. She explained that she was trained in Veleron domestic management and financial administration, skills that were supposed to make her valuable as a spouse. But I never actually applied them. Never had the chance. So I'm telling you this so you understand what you've actually gotten. A spouse with no resources, no connections, and no practical experience despite all my training. I'm exactly as worthless as my people claimed. Daniel's response was pragmatic, cutting through her self-deprecation. My ship doesn't need domestic management in the Veleron sense. It's too small for that. But having another person aboard could actually be useful. I've been running cargo solo for 15 years. If you're willing to learn the basics of cargo hauling and ship maintenance, you could contribute meaningfully to our partnership. Real contribution, not ceremonial. He continued, his tone matter of fact. As for resources and connections, I'm not wealthy myself. I make enough to maintain my ship and cover expenses, with a little left over for emergencies. If you can accept a fairly simple working-class existence aboard a small cargo ship, then we'll figure out together. Day by day, problem by problem. Saras accepted this proposal, perhaps because it was the only real option available, or perhaps because something in Daniel's straightforward honesty felt safer than any alternative. Over the following weeks, they began the awkward process of learning to live together. The ship that had been Daniel's solitary domain for 15 years suddenly held two people navigating each other's space, habits, and unspoken expectations. Saras learned cargo operations, inventory management, operating loading systems, performing routine maintenance. Daniel taught her patiently, showing her how to check manifest systems, how to secure cargo against the shifts of acceleration, how to identify when something was wrong with the ship's systems before it became critical. Daniel learned about Veleron emotional communication through skin color changes, their dietary requirements that necessitated specific supplements, and their cultural frameworks that shaped how Saras understood the world. He learned that certain color patterns meant stress, others meant contentment, and some meant things he was still trying to understand. 3 months into their unexpected marriage, they developed a working partnership that was evolving into something more. Saras had proven herself genuinely competent, taking on responsibilities that made Daniel's work easier. She'd organized his chaotic inventory systems, creating logical structures where chaos had reigned. She'd negotiated better rates with suppliers, using skills from her financial training that finally had practical application. She maintained ship systems with meticulous attention to detail that caught small problems before they became expensive ones. More than that, she'd become a companion in ways Daniel hadn't appreciated he was missing after 15 years of solitary travel. Having someone to talk to during long transits, someone to share meals with, someone to help troubleshoot problems when things went wrong, it changed his daily experience from isolated routine to shared enterprise. The ship felt less like a container and more like a home. For Saras, the transformation was even more dramatic. She'd gone from being a shameful burden to being a valued partner. The skills she'd been taught to make her attractive as a bride now had practical application. She wasn't decorative or symbolic. She was actually contributing to their shared success in tangible, measurable ways. 6 months after their marriage, when they docked at a station with a significant Veleron population, Saras encountered some members of her former social circle. She was in the station's commercial district when she heard her name called in Veleron, the tone carrying surprise that bordered on shock. 3 Veleron women approached, people she'd known before her disgrace. Their reactions were complex, colors shifting rapidly across their skin. Shock that she was still alive, and not destitute. Surprise that she was working as a cargo hauler's spouse. Visible discomfort with how she was thriving, how she didn't carry the broken demeanor they'd expected. Saras handled the encounter with a composure that surprised even herself. She explained briefly that she'd found a life that valued her contributions rather than measuring her by arbitrary age standards. One of the women, attempting sympathy that came across as condescension, suggested, "You must be so grateful that a human was willing to take you in. After everything that happened." Saras corrected her firmly, her skin flashing colors that indicated she would not be patronized. "My husband chose me. Not out of pity, but because he saw worth that my own people missed. There's a difference between being rescued and being chosen. He did the latter." That evening, back on the ship, Saras thanked Daniel for something specific. Not just for claiming me at the dock, but for treating me like a partner rather than a charity case. Veleron culture is so focused on youth and status that people in my position are treated as if they'd failed at being worthy people. Failed at existence itself. You've never treated me that way. Daniel's response revealed his own perspective, thoughts he'd been forming over months. "I claimed you because I was angry at the injustice. That part was impulse. But I've come to genuinely value our partnership. You're not a burden I'm carrying out of obligation. You're a capable person who was given a chance to apply her abilities, and you've exceeded every expectation. If anything, my life is better with you in it. Easier in practical ways, richer in ways I didn't know I was missing." This conversation led to a shift in their relationship from pragmatic partnership to something more emotionally intimate. They'd been married by law for months, but they began developing the emotional connection that made the marriage feel real rather than legal, something neither of them had expected to find. A year after their marriage, they returned to Velian Station for cargo pickup. Word had spread about the human trader who'd married an unmarriageable Velaron woman and how she was thriving. It had become controversial in ways neither of them had anticipated. Conservative Velerons saw it as proof that humans didn't understand their culture, that outsiders were interfering in matters they couldn't comprehend. Progressive Velerons pointed to it as evidence their marriage customs needed reform, that age restrictions were creating unnecessary suffering. The debate had taken on a life of its own. When Daniel and Saras arrived at the station, they were approached by several young Veleron women, all approaching the age where they'd be considered too old for marriage. These women wanted to meet Saras, to understand how she'd built a life after being rejected. Saras spoke to them honestly about her experience. The shame of being unmarried past acceptable age, the humiliation of the marriage dock, the feeling of being discarded by everyone she'd known. But also the unexpected liberation of finding that life didn't end just because culture said she'd failed. She'd found purpose, partnership, and value in a life that didn't conform to Veleron expectations. Some elders criticized this conversation, suggesting Saras was undermining their cultural values and leading young people astray. They accused her of spreading discontent, of making their traditional systems seem cruel when they were actually necessary for social order. Daniel pointed out, his tone diplomatic but firm, "I didn't create this situation. I just responded to it. If Veleron culture is going to discard people as worthless based on arbitrary age standards, you can't complain when those people find worth and happiness outside your cultural framework. You don't get to throw someone away and then be upset when they survive without you." The years that followed saw Daniel and Saras fully integrating their lives. Their partnership proved successful beyond initial expectations. The cargo business grew modestly but steadily. They upgraded to a slightly larger ship, one with actual separate living quarters and improved systems. Their relationship deepened into genuine love that neither had expected. Daniel, who'd spent 15 years convinced he preferred solitude, discovered he'd just been waiting for the right companion. Saras, who'd been taught her worth expired with youth, learned that value was something you created through contribution and connection, not something determined by age or status. They became unintentional symbols of how rigid cultural standards could miss the actual worth of individuals. Young Velerons facing similar circumstances began seeking alternatives to traditional paths. Some human traders began questioning customs they'd previously accepted without thought. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. Saras reflected years later, sitting in the cockpit during a long transit, being left at that marriage dock was the worst day of my life. The culmination of years of shame and rejection, everything I feared coming true. She paused, watching stars stream past. But it was also the day I met you. The day someone chose me, not despite my age or reduced status, but simply because he saw me as a person who deserved better. That choice changed everything. Daniel, sitting beside her, considered his own reflection. I acted on impulse. I was motivated by anger at injustice rather than any clear plan. I had no idea what I was doing. He smiled slightly. But that impulsive choice gave me a partner, a companion, and eventually a genuine love that's enriched my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Best mistake I ever made. Their story carried a simple truth that resonated across cultures. Worth is not defined by age, status, or cultural approval, but by being seen and chosen without conditions. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships begin with someone refusing to accept another person's devaluation. Sometimes challenging unjust customs creates opportunities for genuine connection that rigid traditions would never allow. And sometimes doing the right thing for the right reasons leads to unexpected happiness that no one could have planned for. You just have to be willing to act when the moment demands it, even when everyone else is looking away.